Hello, my name is Sarah, and today I'm sewing the Astell Skirt by Cashmerette Club. The Astell Skirt is part of the Cashmerette Club membership program. If you want to learn more about the membership program, check the link in the description. The Astell Skirt is a bias cut skirt, giving you a graceful fit that moves with you. The Astell Skirt features an interior hidden waistband with elastic, and there's two options. You can sew one with an invisible zipper or without. The Astell Skirt sews up pretty quickly, so let's get to it. For our notions today, for both views, you're going to need 1.5 inch wide no roll elastic. And if you're doing the zipper view, you're going to need a 9-inch invisible zipper. Our seam allowances are 1/2 inch or 12 millimeters, and I'm going to be using a 2.5 millimeter stitch length. And for my fabrics, I'll be using a size 12 Microtex needle, but select the needle size that's appropriate for your fabric. You'll want to cut this in a light to medium weight drapey woven fabric. Today I'm going to be using a voile for one of my skirts and a linen for the other one. You're going to want to cut your Astell on the bias, and you're going to need a front skirt, a back skirt, a front waistband, and a back waistband, all cut on the bias. Let's get sewing. The first two steps for the zipper or non-zipper view are the same. We're going to sew our back darts and we're going to stay stitch our waist. We're going to put this right sides together and stitch our darts. Once we've stitched our darts, we're going to press them toward the center that way. And now we're going to stay stitch our waistline front and back, and we're going to start from the side seam and go toward the center on each side. And repeat for the other skirt. Now, if you're sewing the zippered version, you can move to the timestamp on the screen, and if you're not using a zipper, you can continue on right here. Next, we're going to sew our side seams, and I'm going to be doing a French seam on this skirt, and on the other one, I'll be doing an edge finish like a serger overlock or zigzag. For the French seam, I'm going to place my skirt wrong sides together. So if you're not doing a French seam, you would place your skirt right sides together and sew your seam and finish your allowance. And you can see that in the zippered version. So I'll first sew my seam a little less than half the seam allowance. We'll make sure that we're matching our notches and we're not stretching the side seam. This is going to be a very stretchy garment since it was cut on the bias. So you have to be really careful not to pull or stretch your seams as you sew. Just let them relax, line up your notches, and sew. Now bias doesn't fray, but I'm still going to trim this down a little bit so that it fits inside my next seam allowance. Now I'm going to press my seam to one direction, doesn't matter, and then I'm going to fold it right sides together and press it right with that seam on the edge, ready for sewing. All right, now I'm going to place this right sides together and sew my second pass along the seam, enclosing that cut edge and using the remainder of the seam allowance that I have. So we'll have used the full 1/2 inch by the time we're done sewing the seam. And I'll repeat with my other side seam, and then we're going to move on to the elastic. Let's assemble our waistband. We have the back waistband and the front waistband. We're going to place these right sides together and sew the side seams here at 1/2 inch. Now we're going to press these seams open, and then we're going to press this whole assembly wrong sides together like this down the entire length, creating a folded loop. All right, just like this. Your single notch will indicate the front and your double notch indicates the back. I've turned my skirt right side out. I have my waist loop here, and I also pinned a 3-inch section, 1.5 inches on either side of center back, so I remember to leave this open when we're going to attach this to the skirt. So we're going to place this right sides together. So I'm going to slip it over my skirt that is right side out, and I'm going to line up my side seams, my center front, and my center back. Now we're going to attach this loop to the skirt, and we're going to sew it at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, or 1 centimeter. Be careful not to pull or distort any of the layers, since the bias can get away from us sometimes. The stay stitch is going to help here. All right, we've left this opening so we can insert our elastic. Next, we're going to do a couple of pressing steps to sort of set our waistband up for success later on. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull the waistband straight up, and we're going to press it that way. And I recommend pressing your seam allowances up too, because it'll make the next couple of steps more successful. So we're going to press everything straight up. All right, just like this, we have our waistband and our seam pressed up. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to press it down, and we're going to press it inside the skirt, press it down into the skirt, and we're going to do this from the waistband side so we can see a bit of our outer skirt peeking above our waistband. This will make it hidden to the world when we're wearing our skirt. All right, it's looking like this. This is our outer skirt with our waistband pressed on the inside. Now we're going to flip it again to the outside just to make inserting the elastic easier. I'm going to put this with the back facing up, and now I have access to this opening that I left for myself to insert the elastic. Grab your elastic, and now I want you to stretch it a few times, the whole length of it, before you cut it to the length that we need for our waistband. This just sort of primes it up and make sure that it doesn't end up being too large later. Now you can use the chart in the instructions to select the size that you want, and then we'll cut our elastic to the length that we want. Now secure your elastic to a safety pin or a bodkin, whatever works for you, and we're going to pull it now through our tunnel using that opening that we left for us. I'm being careful not to let my elastic twist. It'll be a lot easier later on when we're securing it. And I'm also going to keep my eye on the end so it doesn't suck into the tunnel there. I think the key with doing things like this is to not get too eager and just sort of inch it along as you go. Okay, we're back at the beginning. So now we're going to overlap our elastic a 1/2 inch or 12 millimeters. And we're going to secure it. You can use a zigzag. I'm going to use 2 parallel rows of stitches. You really want to secure it. You don't want this to come undone later on. And make sure your waistband is not flipped or twisted. Make sure it's flat all the way around. And you can even give it a nice little tug to make sure that it's secure. All right, so now we're going to give this a nice little tug, get our elastic completely in there. Make sure you get the skirt evenly distributed around your waistband, since we're going to stitch it down on the sides so that we can anchor it and make sure that it doesn't flip to the outside. So you'll want this excess skirt to be evenly distributed all the way around. Make sure you don't have any flat sections and then some scrunched sections. You'll want it all about the same. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now we're going to sew that last little section of the waistband to the skirt and enclose our tube. You want to keep the elastic out of the way the best you can. If you're having trouble getting the presser foot to kind of behave in this step, if you put the left half of your presser foot on the elastic without the needle touching it, it'll run along this edge a little easier rather than falling off and creating a wiggly seam. All right, now we're going to finish this seam allowance, so you can use your chosen method. You can zigzag or overlock, whatever you plan on doing. All right, just like that. And now we're going to understitch. So remember when we pressed our waistband up and we pressed our seam allowance up? Now we're going to understitch. And we're gonna do that in that little small space between the seam and the elastic. All right, our elastic waistband's looking pretty good. Remember when we pressed our waistband up and our seam up? Well, make sure that you do that again, just that it's laying really nicely. And now we're gonna understitch the seam allowance to the waistband between the elastic and the seam. So you wanna get really close in between the two. You don't wanna catch the elastic. And we don't want to go past the seam since we don't want it to be visible on the right side. I'm going to turn my skirt inside out for this step so I can sew this flat against the machine. And I'm going to start at a side seam here, and I'm sort of going to gently push my elastic as far to the right as possible, pressed up against this top edge here. All right, we're going to go right in that space between the elastic and the seam right here. Near the seam allowances will be the hardest part since it's a little bit thicker with more fabric there, and you'll find it a lot easier once you get away from those spots. I'm giving it a good tug, making sure everything's nice and flat and we're not catching anything else. You can see my presser foot is riding along the edge of the elastic. That kind of helps stabilize the sewing and make it less wiggly, so it's not falling off or trying to be to the left of it. I just embrace the fact that it's a really tight place, and I just let my presser foot ride along the side of the elastic. This is definitely when you'll know how accurate your seam allowances were in certain places. You'll find it also that if you pull and stretch, it's going to tighten the waistband and narrow it down. So let it relax. Make sure you let it relax and you'll get more space. The bias is very stretchy, and so when you pull on it, it will tighten it up and narrow it. All right, we're back at the beginning. Just a couple more steps. We're almost done. It's looking really good. So now we're going to turn our waistband to the inside. And we're going to give it some good stretches, making sure that that elastic is still nice and distributed evenly all the way around. And we're going to stitch in the ditch to secure our waistband. So make sure your seam allowances are pressed to the back. And I'm just going to do kind of a practice run with a straight pin here on each side and make sure I like the way that's looking. If your seams were sewn pretty accurately with the waistband stacking on top of the side seam, then you can sort of use that as an initial guide. All right, and so let's make sure everything's looking good. And now we're going to stitch in the ditch, which means that we're going to try and pull apart this outer side seam right here. We're going to try and pull it as much as we can, and then we're going to stitch right in the ditch of the seam. This won't be very visible, so don't worry if part of yours shows. I'm using contrast thread, so that's really going to show, and I'm still not worried about it. All right, so we're getting this nice and flat. We're spreading everything out. We want our waistband to the inside, and we want a little bit of our outer skirt kind of poking up so that we know everything is hidden on the inside there. There we go. You can see mine right here. Now I'll trim my threads if there are any. And now we'll do the other side. This is going to help our waistband stay to the inside of the garment. There we go. All right, let's see how it's looking. There we go. We have our skirt with an invisible waistband in there. Our last step is the hem. You can do your hem a few different ways. You can use the narrow rolled hem on your serger if you have that. You can use a rolled hem foot. The Astell skirt comes with a 1/4 inch hem allowance and then stitch it down. I'm going to use a wider hem allowance. Not unlike the rolled hem, I'm just using a wider turn for closer to about 1 1/4 inches or almost 35 millimeters wide. I find the bias to be very forgiving with these kinds of hems, which is really nice, and we're just going to edge stitch it down like we would a normal rolled hem. One tip I have for you when pressing your hem is to not slide the iron along the hem, especially on the bias cut. You're going to want to lift the iron, set it down, lift it and set it down as you go around the hem. And as you're sewing it, don't pull on it. The bias really is super stretchy and it can get away from you. You don't want torque lines going on your hem here. Mine is obviously a lot wider than what's called for in the instructions, so torque lines would be more obvious. On a narrow rolled hem, you're going to be fine. And there we have it. I hope you enjoy wearing your Astell skirt, and if you want to sew one with a zipper, I'll be doing that next. We're now making the zipper view. You've already done your darts and your stay stitching at your waist. If you'd like some further stabilization on the side that your zipper is going to be sewn into, you can cut 2 pieces of interfacing that are 3/4 of an inch or 19 millimeters wide by 9 inches or 23 centimeters long. And then you'll press that onto the side that you're going to be sewing your zipper to. In the instructions, it's going to be assumed that you're sewing the zipper to the right side as if the garment is worn. And that's the way I'm going to be sewing mine in today. So attach your interfacing if you're using it, and then you're going to finish the raw edges of your side seams, both front and back. And that will look like this. I'm using an overlock finish on the zipper version. I'm going to be using an invisible zipper foot, sew the zipper onto the skirt. Now, if you don't have an invisible zipper foot, mine looks like this. It is a really handy little tool and it does a really good job. If you don't have one of those, that's completely okay. You can use a regular zipper foot. The key with sewing an invisible zipper, there's a couple of things. It's a pretty easy thing to sew. Our goal is that when it's sewn and closed and being worn, you can't see the zipper at all. This is possible because the zipper is constructed in a way that allows the fabric to roll over and cover the zipper completely. When you get your zipper out of the package, you're going to notice that you can roll this zipper like this, and there's kind of a crevice there. Your stitching needs to be in that little bit there that looks different. You'll notice that the way the tape is woven, it has different textures, and there's this little sweet spot that's far enough away from the teeth, but still close enough so that once you've sewn in there and you zip it up, the fabric comes together on the outside and looks really nice. I find it a lot easier to sew these on when you lightly press with an iron the zipper open. I'm going to take my iron on the wrong side of the zipper and press it open so that it's nice and flat. It won't stay like that for long, so I don't recommend doing this unless you're about to start sewing. And it'll look something like this, if you can see the difference between these two sides here. The right hand side has been pressed open, and the left hand side is still rolled over onto itself. You don't need to press it open if you're using an invisible zipper foot, but you're going to find it really handy to press it open if you're using a regular zipper foot. Now, 2 of the other tricky parts about sewing an invisible zipper is that you want to keep your side seam completely open. You don't want to sew it together yet. You want to sew the zipper onto each side separately, and then you sew the seam below the zipper afterward. Now, it's really handy if you have a way to be able to pull this zipper pull behind the seam. And this will make sense later on when we're at that step, because that's really the trickiest part with an invisible zipper, is the seam below it once you've got it installed. Now, the other tricky thing about an invisible zipper is never assume you have it the right way. You want to make sure and double check along the way that you're not sewing it to the wrong side, because it is kind of a confusing looking zipper, and you always want to be sewing the right side of your zipper to the right side of your garment face down. All right, and this is how that would look. So let's put our skirt right side up, and we can put our zipper face down. So this is the right side of the zipper. And we're going to line this up with the stop of the zipper up here, about a 1/2 inch away from the top raw edge, which is the seam line. That 1/2 inch part is where the seam line is. And you're going to want the zipper to go into the groove of the invisible zipper foot. And if you're not using the invisible zipper foot, you just want to be able to sew in that little sweet spot where the weaving looks different on the twill tape of the zipper. It'll look different between different brands of zipper tape, but you're going to be able to notice like a little line there, and you're going to want to stay right there. Don't get too close to the zipper, and make sure you check it after you've sewn it. You also want to be careful you're not stretching the bias, but if you put the interfacing there, that should help stabilize it. Now you're not going to be able to sew all the way past the zipper. You're going to have to sew as close as possible. Just like that. All right, and then we're going to double check it and make sure we're seeing the right side up and the right side up here. Very nice. All right, so now we're ready to do our other side. Remember, this is right side up. So if we put our skirt right sides together and the other side of our zipper facing this right side of this skirt, now we're going to mark on our zipper exactly where we stopped sewing. So here's our spot right here. This is the other thing we want to make sure we do the same thing from left to right. So that's where we stopped sewing on that one. We need to stop sewing for the other side in the same location. So I'm going to put it on this side here, just like that. All right, right side, face down, right side. And we really want our skirts to end up lining up right here at the waist. So you need to be really careful you're not stretching anything. You can use your notches and make sure that you're going to end up in the right location. Now, if you're able to sew from the top down, go for it. I find it a lot easier on this one if I go from the bottom up. So we're going to pull this over here. We're going to undo our zipper. And I probably can't get as close to the zipper as I did on the other side since we're starting at the bottom. You'll find some of those stops get a little pesky at the top here, and they may not want to go through there. These different feet come in different sizes. Usually I see them in 2 different sizes because visible zipper tape comes in 2 different sizes. So hopefully you can find one that matches the style of zipper tape you have most available to you. All right, let's make sure we got it in correctly. There we go. Once we press it, it'll look a lot nicer. All right, I've put my regular zipper foot on so that I can add that little bit of sewing that I didn't get from my blue line up to where I started. And this way we can look at how it is to sew with the zipper foot as well. I find sometimes it's easier than the invisible foot. It just depends on what the configuration is. There we go. And we're going to check it one more time, making sure that on the right side of our skirt, our zipper zips up nicely. There we go. All right, and so now we're going to do that pesky seam below the zipper. I'm going to switch back to my regular foot. So now the easiest way to sew this is with the zipper up if you don't have a way to pull the zipper up once the seam is sewn. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So right now we're going to have to try and get as close to where we started and stopped our zipper attachment there below the seam here. And you can see the zipper's sort of in the way. Now when we open up the zipper, it makes it a lot easier because it's loose and we can pull the zipper up and sew this seam together. But you can't pull your zipper up once you've sewn the seam. It'll make the opening too small. So I'll show you what I do. I have a special pair of medical scissors that allows me to grab that zipper pull and pull it through the hole. All right, so we're gonna look for where we ended sewing the zipper there, and we're trying to stack those one on top of the other and get as close as possible.
And once I get this under the machine, I kind of pull the zipper out of the way, make sure everything is nice and flat, and I'm not pulling on anything. I just want it to be as relaxed as possible. We'll sew it at our full seam allowance. And now we want to put the zipper pull in the right place, and you can see that it's kind of disappeared. So I have these little clamping scissors, and they're not really scissors with a blade to cut. It's basically just a way to grab them without hurting the zipper pull. I'm going to poke the zipper pull up, straight up, so I can grab it. Someone else taught me this. And I'm pretty sure this is a Kenneth King trick. So now we can pull it up like this, and we're good. Just like that. So if you know a nurse or someone like that, you can grab a pair of those scissors. All right, so we got it just like that. And we have our invisible zipper. All right, now we can continue sewing the rest of our Astell skirt. All right, let's sew our other side seam. With our seam allowance being finished, that'll help support the seam and prevent as much stretching since the skirt's on the bias, but just respecting the fact that the skirt is on the bias and you don't want it to get misshapen as you're sewing, so just be careful of that. And we're going to press these seams open. All right, we are getting a skirt. Now we're going to assemble our waistband. You just need to make sure that you are getting the correct side seam of the waistband sewn. We're only going to sew one of them. So if this is my side with the zipper and here's my back, I want to make sure I'm sewing this side seam here. So we're going to put this right sides together and we'll sew this one side seam. We're going to press this seam open, and then we're going to press this wrong sides together, making a tunnel. It's time to cut our elastic. We're going to give our elastic a few good tugs before we cut it to the length that we want. And now we're going to open our casing. And we're going to place our elastic inside the casing here, and it's going to stop a ½ inch away from the end, just like this, and we're going to line it up at the fold end. We're going to stitch this in place at either end, making sure you don't twist it, just like that. Now we're going to fold the casing up, and we're going to tack it shut along this really long edge at about a ¼ inch seam allowance, just something to get it in there and secure. And make sure you're not pulling on your bias. It will make your casing narrower. So let's get it in there, and you want everything loose and relaxed. You want to line up your center notch right here, and you're going to want to line up your side seams here. Loose and relaxed. You want as much space here as possible, since the next step will be a little bit tricky if your elastic is filling it all the way up. There we go. Now we're going to open our zipper, and we're going to sew our waistband right sides together to our skirt, matching back to back and front to front. You want to open up the zipper so that you have a nice flat edge here, and we'll line up our long raw edge to the skirt raw edge, just like this. And again, we're going to match centers to centers and side seams to side seams. This time we're going to sew it at a 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. And again, you don't want to stretch anything or misshape the bias, and you also don't want to do that, especially because we don't want our elastic tunnel to get any narrower. Now is a really good time to make sure that your waistband seam is going to line up from front to back. And make any adjustments that you need if it doesn't. Now press your seam allowance of your skirt up toward the waistband, and now we're going to understitch it. You don't want to catch the elastic. We just want to stitch the seam to the waistband between the elastic and the seam of the skirt. And if you need to let the presser foot ride on the edge of the elastic, do so. That might help it from falling off and getting crooked. Now we're going to clean finish this little end of our waistband by folding it down toward the zipper. And I like to do this from the zipper side so I can see where I stitched the zipper and get as close to that as possible. And so we're going to pull this waistband down, lining up those raw edges there. And so in the seam allowance, right next to where you attached the zipper. And then we'll turn it out. And I like to sort of push it in a little bit so that I can still encourage the roll of the invisible zipper. All right, now we'll repeat for our other side. So make sure you straighten it out a little bit. With the elastic only being tacked to one layer of waistband, it might want to pull into the tunnel there. So flatten it out, get your raw edges lined up, line them up to the edge of the zipper here, and then we'll sew as close to where we sewed the zipper to the skirt. Now we're going to make sure our elastic is evenly distributed in the casing there. And we're going to secure the waistband at the side seam here by stitching in the ditch. So I want to be able to see a little bit of my outer skirt above my waistband on the inside here, just so I know that the waistband is nice and hidden. If your seam lines up with your side seam, you can use that as an opportunity. And from the right side, we're going to straighten everything out, make sure that the waistband edge is lined up, side seams lined up, nothing is pulling. You've distributed your elastic really nicely. And now we're going to pull apart this seam and stitch right there in the ditch of the seam, just to the bottom of the elastic. And don't worry, this might be a little visible, but it'll blend right in when you're wearing it. All right, there we go. Looking good. Nice invisible waistband and invisible zipper. Let's hem our Astell skirts. I've pressed my hem a 1/4 inch up, and now I'm going to press it again. I'm just going to fold it over again and do a really narrow hem. You can do any kind of hem treatment that works for you. If you have a rolled hem foot, that might be really handy. If you have the rolled hem stitch on a serger, you can do that. The bias is going to make it really forgiving and easy to hem. Harder to press, easier to hem. There we go. Now we have our zippered Astell skirt. I really enjoyed sewing my Astell skirts with you, and I hope I get to see yours. Thanks for watching. Happy sewing.